Dear Madhuvanti, welcome to the Museum Society of Mumbai. You're very familiar with our activities. And on behalf of the CSMBS, the trustees, the Director General, Mr. Sabyasachi Mukherjee, the staff of the Museum Society of Mumbai, my colleagues on the committee, several guests and friends who have joined us here this evening. Thank you so much, Madhuvanti. I know it's an unearthly hour for you, and we've already done a little rehearsal before this. Madhuvanti is addressing us from her home in Chicago. So we doubly appreciate your adhering to our request and keeping this 5:30 p.m. IST timing. So thank you so very much, Madhuvanti. And I hope the next time round we'll be doing this talk in the CSMBS in our visitor center premises. And I hope that's not going to be too far away. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to say a few words about our really distinguished and erudite speaker for this evening. Dr. Ghose is the first Alsdorf Associate Curator of Indian, Southeast Asian, and Himalayan art at the Art Institute of Chicago, where she's responsible for the exhibition, collection, preservation, and research of the museum's permanent collections in these areas. Since joining the museum in 2007, she has curated and organized a series of exhibitions on Indian art, including the site-specific Public Notice 3 by Jitish Kalat in 2010-2011, The Last Harvest, The Art of Rabindranath Tagore in 2012, Zarina Hashmi, Paper Like Skin in 2013, Nilima Sheikh's Each Night Put Kashmir in Your Dreams in 2014, Gates of the Lord, The Tradition of Krishna Paintings, 2015 to 2016, and last but not the least, Indian Modern, The Paintings of M.F. Hussain in 2017 and 18, and her most recent exhibit, Adornment, Jewelry of South Asia's Nomadic Cultures, which closed last year in mid-October. It's amazing that you can do an exhibition, large exhibitions in large formats like this, Madhuvanti. I know how much effort it takes to change your show every 18 months, and you're practically turning around and changing it every 12 months. Dr. Ghose led the Vivekananda Memorial Program for Museum Excellence from 2012 to 2016, a 4-year project funded by a grant from the Government of India that was designed to foster professional exchanges between the Art Institute in Chicago and various museums in India. In 2020 to 21, she organized and presented a series of virtual workshops on museum curation for the American Institute of Indian Studies as a part of the strengthening of the US-India Professional Collaboration Initiative supported by the US Mission to India. I presume this was the one in Gurgaon. Dr. Ghose has served until recently on the Board of Trustees of the American Association of Art Museums, Curators, and is the recipient for the Center for Curatorial Leadership Fellowship, class of 2020. Prior to all this, she lectured in South Asian Art and Archaeology at the School of Oriental and African Studies. She completed her doctoral dissertation from the University of London and was a research fellow at the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford. Her current research interests include the art of the Pushtimarg sect, the Indian cultural doyen Pupul Jeka, and last but not the least, the textiles of Bengal. Madhuvanti, I'm a very greedy person. I'm going to ask you for this lecture, hopefully in person at the CSMBS. You take your pick in which order you want to do it, Pupul Jekar or the art textiles of Bengal. I leave that to you. But we will have you with us again for some more lectures. But what are we going to hear this evening from Madhuvanti? I'll be very brief because she's the speaker this evening. The Pichvais of Nathdwara, as Jason said, is reviving a legacy will discuss the artistic legacy of the Vaishnava Pushtimarg sect through a focus on the Pichvai, which we know is a painted textile, and it's a hanging. Based in the town of Nathdwara, Rajasthan, these hereditary artists are renowned for having preserved painting traditions in an unbroken legacy for more than 4 centuries. This talk introduces the art of the Pushtimarg showcase in the exhibition Gates of the Lord, the tradition of Krishna paintings, which was held in 2015-2016, and celebrates the artists keeping the tradition alive today through their organization. Ladies and gentlemen, Madhuvanti Ghose presenting Pichvai painting and the artists of Nathdwara. And before I hand the speaker over to the technical team, thank you, technical team, for assisting us, being with us, so ably led by Professor Jason John, Yashraj, Aishwarya, and Mrinalini. Thank you so much. It's a delight. The slides are excellent, and sit back and enjoy the evening. Thank you so much. Over to you, Madhuvanti. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Feroza, for those kind words. And I too wish that I could be with all of you in person. I do hope sincerely that that'll be very soon. Before, we've been trying to put this talk together for a while, so I regret very much that I wasn't able to do this earlier, but better late than never, and better on Zoom than not doing it at all. So I'm really delighted that we finally were able to organize this talk. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time to join us this evening. If you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen, and that will take me 1 second. And at the outset, I want to say how grateful I am for the many of the Pichvais and paintings that you're going to be seeing. They are mainly from the Tapi collection, which is based in Surat in India. And I see that Shilpa Shah is here with us. So Shilpa, a big thank you, as well as from the personal collection of Amit Ambalal, the renowned artist and collector, who has done so much to promote the artistic traditions of the Pushtimarg sect. They were both the prime lenders to Gates of the Lord. And so most of the objects that you're going to be seeing, including the Pichvais and the paintings, come from these 2 primary collections. And one last note of gratitude is that a lot of the beautiful photographs that you're going to be seeing were taken by Anuj Ambalal, the son of Amit Ambalal, who's a wonderful photographer. Any of the terrible images that you're going to see are, of course, mine. So forgive me for those. I'm not a photographer. But at this point, I'd like to kind of get started, if I may, and take you, I know it's very hot in India right now, but take you to the dryness, the dry heat of Rajasthan, to the temple town of Nadwara, which looks like this right now, and to the temple of Shrinathji there, which looks quite unlike most Indian temples, and that has its own story behind it, which I will share in a short while from now. So where are these places located? I know many of you are very familiar with Nadwara and the temple of Shrinathji, but for those who are not familiar, I'd just like to point out on this map that this is where Nadwara is. It's less than 40 minutes today on the new expressway from Udaipur. Of course, it wasn't that close in the past. And one of the important sectarian temples is not very far from Nadwara, which is called Kakroli. I will refer to that as well. And the other region, which I'm going to actually get started with, is of course the region of Vraj, which, as you can see, is around Mathura and Vrindavan. That is the area around the banks of the river Yamuna, where Krishna spent his early years. And we are, of course, talking about Krishna in this talk. So Krishna is the 8th incarnation of the Lord Vishnu. And we will be focusing in this lecture on the life of Krishna as a young person. So we are all in India familiar with the story of how Krishna was whisked away the night that he was born, away from the dangers posed by his uncle, and left. And in this beautiful dispersed Bhagavad Puran, you can see his father Vasudeva going out and braving it in the storms and crossing the river Yamuna, which you see at the base here, and leaving him to be brought up by a group of cowherds on the other side of the river and in the region of Vrindavan today. And the Pushtimarg sect, about whom we're going to hear a little bit more, really celebrates this young Krishna, and particularly his leelas, or his sportive play in this part of his life before he comes back and kills his uncle. So it's this aspect of his life in Vrindavan, in the region of Vraj, that is the focus of today's talk. So briefly about the Pushtimarg sect, that is also known as the Vallabha Sampraday, and that is based on the name of the founder of the sect, Valapacharia, who came in the 15th century to this region of Vraj, like a lot of other great sectarian leaders, searching for the sites associated with Krishna's life in Vraj. And it is there that he comes across this swarup or image, this divine image of Shrinathji. And I wanted to show you that Shrinathji is a very particular aspect of Krishna, with his hand raised, as you see in this painting, which evokes the Leela, the episode in Krishna's life when he lifts Mount Govardhan on the little finger of his left hand to protect the cowherds and the cowherdesses, the gopas and the gopis of Vraj. And when Valapacharia comes, according to a dream that he had, Krishna leads him to Mount Govardhan, which is a small hill in this region. Krishna, as Srinathji, as this image, appears before him. And this episode is described as the Pratham Milan, the first meeting. And as you can see in this painting, a very small little shrine was erected over this this swarup, this divine image, which was revealed. And Valapacharia created a very simple, set of rules about how Srinathji was to be looked after in this early shrine. And today, this first temple can still be seen on Mount Govardhan. And if you're doing parikrama or circumambulation around the hill, you can certainly see it. There's also an active temple adjacent to this. So what happens to the sect after Valapacharia? Valapacharia actually spends most of his life, doing pilgrimage and preaching. So he moves around a lot. And the sect eventually, when he passes away, after kind of a period when his elder son looked after it, it eventually goes to his second son, who is called Vithalnathji. And it is really Vithalnathji who establishes the sect, because Valapacharia was really quite busy preaching most of his life. Vithalnathji establishes the norms of how the Pushtimarg sect is to be run, the very important devotional practices associated with the sect, down to the last details. He was also had a lot of patronage from the Mughal court and from many of the nobles from the Mughal court. So the sect, being positioned in Gokul, not very far from Agra, was well positioned to get a lot of patronage. And over time, many of the Mughals gave them land. And this land was then used by, he had his 7 sons, and they were all given, they all built their own temples in Gokul. Now, one of the terms that we use for the sacred images within the Pushtimarg is the word Swarup, and you will hear me use this term a lot. These are sacred images that are venerated as the living embodiment of Krishna. And Vithalnathji gives his 7 sons what are known as the Nidhi Swarups, which are essentially all of the images that were either given to Valapacharia, his father, or that Valapacharia accrued over time. And each of the sons had the right to venerate Shrinathji, the main image, or the main Swarup of the sect. So even today, all of the different Goswami families that are descended from these original 7 sons, they all have equal rights to venerating Srinathji, but they also have their own Nidhi Swarups around whom they have built their temples. Now, as most of you are aware, this region of Vraj, being very close to Agra, came under a lot of stress in the 17th century. Many of the temples around Mathura especially started to be destroyed. And when, most importantly, the Keshavdev temple was broken in Mathura, slowly the different families associated with these different sons of Vithalnathji, they slowly started to migrate with their Nidhi Swarups. And where would they migrate? They migrated towards Rajputana. And each of the Nidhi Swarups has a whole history of how they were hidden and taken to different places, wherever there were followers. And they were, over time, they came to be established in different places. So different places in Rajputana and later on in Gujarat came to be associated with particular of the Nidhi Swarups. For example, I'll show you a couple of examples of some of the most important ones. Mathureshji, who is one of the most important Nidhi Swarups, eventually comes and resides in Kota. And similarly, Dwarkadhishji, from the 3rd house, descended from the 3rd of the sons of Vithalnathji, eventually comes and is based in Kakroli, where you will be able to see him not very far from Nathdwara. But in this talk, again, we're really focusing on Srinathji. And Srinathji also was smuggled and taken, and hidden in many different places and venerated in many different places. But eventually, the bullock cart in which Thakurji was being hidden and taken got stuck on a muddy road in a place called Sinhar. And that was not very far from Udaipur. And it was taken as Shrinathji's desire to actually reside in Sinhar. And over time, a temple was built there. And that is what we call Nadwara today, a very different place from then. Nadwara literally meaning the gates of the Lord. Nadwara, even today, despite all its rapid growth, like every other place in India, and expressways joining it and everything, you still feel the difference between, say, Udaipur and Nathdwara when you go there. Nathdwara is a very special and different kind of place, and I hope you will get a sense of that as we discuss in this talk. So the center of Nathdwara really is the Haveli of Srinagi. And this is, you're of course not allowed to photograph inside this Haveli of Srinagi. Over here, what you see is the palace of the Tilkayat, who is the head of the sect, descended from the first offspring of Vitalnaji. And adjacent to that is the Haveli of Srinagi. And what you are seeing is essentially the home of Nand, Krishna's foster father. There was never this intention that this should look like a temple, with a curvilinear tower or anything like that. That is not what you're seeing. And all of the temples of the Pushtimarg sect are really regarded as the personal temples of the Goswamis, the descendants of Valapacharia. And within this complex, this is like a complete maze, but this painting kind of gives you a sense of it. So the main shrine is, of course, that of Shrinathji, which you see in the courtyard. The courtyard in front of it is where celebrations such as the Govardhan Puja and Annakoot are celebrated. There you can see Annakoot, and here's the Govardhan Puja. This is one of the entrances to the Haveli of Srinagi. And in the adjacent courtyard, you see the little shrine of Navnit Priyaji, which is an aspect of the baby Krishna. And within this, there are other shrines as well. And it's a huge complex. It's a complete maze. But when you come outside, that in itself is also a maze of lanes and gullies. And today in those lanes and gullies, unfortunately, it's very hard to see a good Pichvai, which is what Nadwara was renowned for until quite recently. Instead, in the bazaars of Nadwara today, you will see these kind of images that are embossed images of Srinathji. And this is unfortunately what is easy to make. And this is what often Vaishnavas, when they go back from Nadwara, they carry back with them, because a very important aspect of veneration of Srinathji is Chitra Seva, venerating the image of Srinathji. And often, unfortunately, it's these embossed images that are encrusted with lots of gold and lots of four diamonds that have become the trend in recent years. And this is what actually, when I went back to Nadwara around 2011, I think, no, 2012, no, 11, 12, that I witnessed. And that made me really concerned because, I was accustomed to these exquisite Pichvais that Nadwara was renowned for until quite recently. And one actually can only see these beautiful Pichvais in people's collections. And if you're lucky, you will see them, in Nadwara. So at this point, I'd just like to briefly touch upon what is a Pichvai before moving on, because while I think many of you might be familiar with what is a Pichvai, some of you may not be. So a Pichvai is essentially the textile hanging that hangs behind Shrinathji's Swarup, as well as that of other Swarups of the sect. And in Nadwara, particularly because the stele of the Swarup of Srinathji is rectangular, Pichvais that are associated with Nathdwara often have this kind of cutout. And sometimes this section, and this section are made separately. In other cases, you will see just a rectangular or a square Pichvai, and I'll show you some examples and photographs and other things so that you get a sense of it. But I do want to say one more thing. So the Pichvai is hung behind the Swarup, and it helps you focus when you're doing darshan on where the Swarup is. And why is that important? Because many of the sectarian images are actually quite small. So they're difficult to kind of find when they're, dressed in and bejeweled. So the Pichvai kind of helps force your eye towards the place that you're supposed to be focusing on for darshan. And even in Nathdwara, say you are trying to do darshan of Srinathji here, it's, you're trying to kind of gaze at him over the heads of other people. So the Pichvai really does help you kind of focus on his very enlarged eyes so that you can exchange glances for darshan. But the Pichvai is not the only textile that is associated with the Pushtimarg sect. There are many other textiles. So for example, there are Divalgiris, there are these wall hangings that hang in the shrine. There are also these ceiling hangings, which are called chandvos. And then there are other textiles that are part of the Singhasan. So really, you are not only talking about the Pichvai, you're really talking about this entire group of shrine textiles, which help create a certain environment for the veneration. And that is kind of important, and I'll explain that in a moment. So here, for example, you see in this vintage photograph, the shrine. And of course, within the Pushtimarg, you never show the sacred Swarups, so that is blanked out. But this would have been a small baby Krishna. But you see that the Singhasan would have had its own textile, and which also has this base with the cows, and then the Pichvai would be hanging behind. So all of these shrine furnishings actually go to create the ambiance of the darshan that you're doing. Here is this exquisite Zardozi Pichvai that was originally in the Laluji Maharaj Haveli in Surat, which is today, I'll show you in a minute where it is today. But again, the Singhasan in front helps you understand these some of these shrine textiles. Often you will see a textile with this shape, and it's smaller, which often is mistakenly called a Pichvai. This is a Singhasan textile. It's not a Pichvai. This is a Pichvai. And this exquisite Zardozi Pichvai from the 18th century is today in the, it's from the mid 17th century. It's really a very beautiful and very early Pichvai, completely on a velvet ground, embroidered with Zardozi and Ari work. And it has been exquisitely restored by the Tapi collection, where it resides today. So you can have a Pichvai that is embroidered, you can have a textile Pichvai, but really what we think of when we think of Pichvais are really the painted ones. And here, for example, is another exquisite Pichvai of Sharad Purnima from the Tapi collection, which we will discuss in more detail in a minute. But when you think about the great Pichvais of the Pushtimarg sect, you're really thinking about these painted Pichvais, which are really associated with Nathdwara and the regions around Nathdwara in Rajasthan. Now, all of these Pichvais were created by the artists who traditionally, a group of 5 artist families came with Shrinathji to Nathdwara, and then over time many more artists came because of the amount of pilgrimage related work that Nathdwara eventually resulted in. And even today, there's this period between Dasara and Diwali when all the artists get together and they refresh, they whitewash and refresh all the wall paintings in and around the Srinathji Haveli, as well as all the other temples in town. And this is done as seva. So this is something that is part of their loving devotion because they're all followers of the Pushtimarg sect. But to see the great Pichvais, like the ones that we see in collections today, you are not going to find them on the bazaars of in the bazaars of Nathdwara nowadays. You have to go through the winding streets at the back of the temple to what is called the Chitrakaro Ki Gali. And there, if you're lucky, you will see an artist like Anandilalji actually painting a Pichvai. So this in itself was so sad for me, because when I would talk to the artists and their families, all of them were very proud about the fact that their children no longer had to depend on painting Pichvais because, somebody was becoming an engineer, somebody was doing marketing, somebody was becoming a CA. And I was really concerned at the fact that within my own lifetime, I was seeing a tradition that had existed for so many centuries evaporate. And people in Nathdwara were really not conscious of how this tradition of the artists and their painting traditions was evaporating, as we speak. So this led me to curate this exhibition called Gates of the Lord, the Tradition of Krishna Paintings, back in 2015-16. And I'm going to show you just very briefly some images from this exhibition as we discuss and look at the paintings. But before I do that, I really do want to explain 2-3 words that I will be using a lot. One, of course, is seva. And I think most of you are familiar with this word, but essentially it means loving service. But in the case of the Pushtimarg, this is really taken to a great amount of detail. A lot of attention is paid to seva. Seva is one of the essential ways to venerate Srinathji and the other swarups of the sect. So literally the entire day in one of the Havelis of Srinathji is divided, according to different prahars where you do seva. And that includes not just the ordinary aspects, but it includes actually creating a particular ambiance with music, with the aarti, with the shrine furnishings, everything that evokes a certain mood and transforms the visit, the darshan, from just an ordinary, going quickly, gazing at your chosen Ishtadevata and running out, to something that really touches you and moves you. And so the basis of this seva is rag, bhog, and shringar. Rag is, of course, music, and music is associated with every one of the darshans of the Pushtimarg sect. And within this, of course, the ragas are composed around different poems, if you like, that are associated with the Ashtachap poets, the very famous 8 poets who were associated with the Pushtimarg, who created the most beautiful poems. One of the most famous, of course, is Surdas. And then bhog, because every time of the day is associated with a particular type of food, and that is also seasonal, as is shringar, or adornment, which, as you will see, and as I will try to demonstrate, is associated with the different seasons and the different occasions. And just to give you a slight example, this painting, for example, is of Gwal Darshan, which is essentially the darshan that evokes the mood of the baby Krishna going and playing with his cowherd friends and taking the cows to pasture. So within the shrines of the Pushtimarg, you evoke this. This is in everybody's mind as the shringar that is associated with the Gwal Darshan, or the songs that are sung at the time of Gwal Darshan, or the food that is offered at the time of Gwal Darshan, are all associated with this moment in mind. So the paintings help you understand, but obviously if you're a follower of the sect, you know this already. And so all of the episodes and the leelas of Krishna are in your mind as you're going and venerating him. And the entire Shringar helps to evoke a particular mood that you're in, as you're doing darshan. So I'm just going to briefly show you some of the seasons associated with the calendar of the Pushtimarg, which really starts with the Hindu New Year, which happens in the spring, in April. And that obviously leads to summer. And as all of you are experiencing a very, very tortuous summer this year, you will understand the mood that is being evoked in the Pushtimarg temples right now. And that is described really well in this painting, where if you were to go to Nadwara today, this is what you're likely to see. Shrinathji adorned in the thinnest of white muslins. Usually a white muslin would be hung behind his stele. The entire stele during the summer months is exposed, and the Pichvais is hung behind it. So you actually see the stele and are able to do darshan of it in these summer months. And everything is white. His clothes are such that they don't bother his body, because remember, he's a young child. He's just 8 years old. They sprinkle the marble floors with water that evokes his play with on the banks of the river and in the Yamuna, and the water is sweetened and beautifully fragranced. And the thing that you can't see in the painting, but you would witness if you were there, are the smells associated with the summer season. And that is because the waters that are offered are sweetened with the smell of fragrant roses, jasmines, sandalwood. Shrinathji's body is, has sandalwood applied. It's not just ordinary sandalwood, it's sandalwood mixed with a lot of other beautiful fragrances. That is, put on his body to make him feel cool. And of course, the foods that are offered are associated with the summer months. And he's given playthings to play with. Here, for example, most of the accoutrement would be in silver. And here you see, for example, a little boat, which evokes again his play in the waters of the Yamuna at this time of the year. So everything, and even the fans that he's fanned with are khas fans, because again, when you put water on khas, that creates a beautiful fragrance too. And he has beautiful flowers, again with sweet fragrance, that adorn him, but nothing too much, because of course it's 42, 43 degrees Celsius in Nadwara right now. And this is the time of the year when you have the kind of shringars that are associated, for example, with the Phul Mandali, which is essentially a pavilion of roses. So everything is associated with either fragrant flowers or with water play. And whenever you're thinking about water play, you're thinking about Krishna playing in the different water bodies around Vrindavan. around the region of Raj. And that is what is evoked in this very famous Pichvai, the Lotus Pichvai from the Ambalal collection. And a lot of the Pichvais that are hung at this time of the year are also associated with what is called Jal Vihar, or playing, performing leelas within these water tanks. So here, for example, is a beautiful lace Pichvai from the Tapi collection, which again shows you a pavilion within by the side of a tank, and these little boats with the gopis in there, and the person who's missing is, of course, Krishna. And the image that that lace Pichvai is evoking is this kind of play in the water bodies, where Krishna would be playing with the gopis. And in this case, in this painting, actually he's playing with Yamunaji herself. You see the dark appearance of Yamunaji, so you can recognize her. And as summer gives way, the monsoon months are really a time of great play within the Pushtimarg Havelis, when over a set of days, you create hindolas or swings of different materials, sometimes very fragrant, beautiful materials, and swing the swarups of the sect. And again, evoking Krishna and his play with the gopis on the monsoon evenings. And this is when Pichvais like this are hung. Here's the very famous Morkuti Pichvai from the Tapi collection, which evokes the peacocks dancing. And that is, of course, a reference also to Krishna as a peacock dancing and attracting the gopis who come, dance to his tune. Within the monsoon months, of course, the primary festivals start, and that is, of course, Janmashtami. And within the Pushtimarg sect, while the birth of Krishna, of course, is very important, it's actually the morning after that is even more celebrated. The morning when Krishna is in the home of Nand is celebrated as Nand Mahotsav, when you do this play with yogurt. And then all the priests of the Pushtimarg sect, they do a ras in celebration of Krishna coming to Nand's home. And that is what you're seeing evoked in this little painting. And I'm not going to touch much on the Pichvais from the Deccan, because that is almost a lecture in itself. But I just wanted to say briefly that from the Deccan, you have some exquisite golden Pichvais, like these black and gold ones. They were created in Vaishnav homes, where they were usually created for a veneration within their own temples, their personal shrines. And some of the bigger ones were also donated to the Guru Ghars, the homes of the gurus of some of these Vaishnavas from the region around Hyderabad. And they're usually black, but you can get exquisite red ones too. And they're all fully worked in gold with gold leaf. But as I said, I'm not going to go too much into these Pichvais here. Another very important aspect of the Pichvais from the Deccan are Kalamkari Pichvais. And again, I'm not going to touch too much upon that, other than to say that in this beautiful Pichvai, in the Kalamkari technique from the Deccan, possibly made in Masulipattnam, you're seeing the famous scene of the Krishna with the gopis, on the occasion of Ras. The autumn really is the time of the year which is celebrated the most with lots of festivals, one after another. And the autumn moon, particularly the full moon, is an occasion to celebrate. And often you'll have the most beautiful poetry that celebrates, for example, Krishna comparing Radha's face to, or one of the gopis' faces to the full moon. And there's a lot of romance around the moon during the autumn months. Perhaps most celebrated of all is Sharad Purnima, the fall moon, when Krishna danced the ras with the gopis on the banks of the river Yamuna. And that is what you're seeing here in this very famous Pichvai from the Tapi collection. The gopis are all dancing with him, thinking that he is dancing solely with each of them. And there you have the full moon, and the gods have come in their chariots to witness this divine dance. And some of the most renowned Pichvais really celebrate the Ras. In this very large Pichvai, which is today in the Sakla, it's part of the Smithsonian collection, you actually see the Ras being performed, and you see that Krishna is dancing with each of the gopis. And there was a moment when the gopis became a little bit too proud of the fact that, they thought Krishna was dancing solely with them. So Krishna disappears. And here on the banks of the river Yamuna, you can see the gopis are, essentially they were like, what happened? They were devastated for a moment, desolate. And then they spend the night recreating the stories of Krishna and telling each other the stories of Krishna. And here, for example, they are telling the story of how Krishna lifted Mount Govardhan to protect the cowherds of Braj. And within this time, the most important, perhaps the most significant after Janmashtami festival is that of Govardhan Puja, when this episode of Krishna lifting Mount Govardhan is celebrated in all the temples of this sect. And you see this evoked in Pichvais like this, which celebrate the Annakoot, which is when a mountain of food is offered to the sectarian images. And then the doors of the temples are left open. And in Nathdwara, even today, you will witness the local indigenous population from around Nathdwara. They come and then they attack the Annakoot, and which is called looting the Annakoot. And the entire night, I mean, it takes them days to put all this food together, this mountain of food. And then within an entire night, it all goes away because it's taken by the local indigenous population. And then they sometimes actually store this in their homes for the entire year. So this in itself is something worth witnessing at Nadwara. And the last of the very important festivals of the fall is Gopashtami, that celebrates the day when Krishna became a cowherd for the first time. And some of the most exquisite Pichvais, particularly textile ones, are associated with Gopashtami. And I'm just showing a few just to show you a variety of Pichvais. And the seasonal cycle then comes round to the winter, when some of the brighter colors, the very rich colors and tones are used, both in the Pichvais and in the shrine decorations. And I'm just showing you some examples of some of these brocaded Pichvais that come out at this time of the year. And the season ends with spring, which is celebrated between Vasant Panchami and Holi. Every day, a plain white Pichvai is hung behind Thakurji, and then the Goswamis play with Gulal. And they create these amazing decorations with Gulal. And it kind of builds into the crescendo around Holi and Dol. So it really is one of the most beautiful times of the year to witness in the Pushtimarg Havelis. And that is also the time when spring and everything new and fresh is celebrated with Pichvais like this on the occasion of Kunj Ekadashi, which celebrates the new growth with plants. So that essentially is the calendar between the summer and finishing up with Holi. I'd briefly like to touch upon, the patrons of the artists, because they play such an important role when you think about the taste and the type of shringar that you see. And that really, from the patron's point of view, what you're looking at are the Tilkayats, the heads of the sect, and the other Goswamis who lead the different temples, the different Havelis of the Pushtimarg sect. So the Tilkayat obviously plays a major role based on his influence. And perhaps the Tilkayat that was the most influential to begin with was Dauji Maharaj, Damodar Ji II, who was Tilkayat during the early part of the 19th century. And this is a time when painting really starts to flourish in Nadwara. He was quite a character, he was so powerful that all the leading kings, the Rajput kings of this time, would come to him and ask him to solve their wars and their fights and their arguments between each other. So he was extremely influential. And there was this whole time when Kishore Singh of Kota comes and actually lives in Nathdwara. And eventually when Kishore Singh goes back, because he loses his throne for a bit, when he eventually goes back, he takes, he's given a swaroop, and the Bara Mahal in Kota is absolutely filled with the work of the artists of Nadwara. He takes a group of artists to from Nadwara to Kota, and who flourished then in Kota. So a lot of the ways in which we think about Rajput painting, in these kind of boxes around the different Rajput states, I think we have to really rethink that model, because the influence of other factors, whether it's artists who move from place to place, or the role of, say, the temple at Nadwara, is really something that has not been studied significantly up to now, and needs to be when you think about the development of painting in different places. And so Goswamis, like the Goswamis, the heads of the temple at Kakroli, are very influential. The Mathura Goswamis, the head of the Mathura temples, they produce some of the most exquisite paintings that show their aesthetic sense, as you can see in some of these paintings. And the last of the great Goswamis was really the Tilkayat Govardhan Lalji, who reigned in Nadwara and over the sect in the late 19th and early part of the 20th century. This is regarded as the golden age of Nadwara and of Nadwara painting. And I hope you'll get a sense of why in a minute. So up to now, everything that you've seen has been anonymous. Great Pichvais like this, we don't know who painted them. But what we can say is that these are Pichvais that are created in the last quarter of the 19th century, because they now start to not only show a lot of complexity, but you start to see the presence of aniline dyes, because the color palette changes completely with the introduction of different pigments from Europe. And you also see the influence of European prints, of postcards, paintings coming into Nadwara. And, Krishna and Radha are seen frolicking in these kind of late Victorian kind of surroundings. Nadwara also, by this time, had a very active mural painting tradition. And at this time, you start to see that the artists are not only working in Nadwara, but in adjacent areas, such as the palace at Dungarpur. The Juna Mahal is completely painted by the artists of Nadwara. And so the influence of these artists is magnified. And guess what? one of the really important features about this time in the late 19th, early 20th century is that for the first time, we start to see the work of individual artists. We start to associate the work with individual names. So the artists who were nameless until now start to actually emerge, and they start to become well known. And this happens during the time of Govardhan Lalji. So you start to get to know the artists of Nadwara, and you start to identify their individual hands. And that is very significant because it is something that was missing until now. So they really come out of anonymity thanks to Govardhan Lalji. Here, for example, is the artist Narayan, one of the early well-known artists to emerge from Narayan. And we start to see that the main artist of Nadwara, of the painting Mukhya, is somebody called Sukhdev Kishandas. And Sukhdevji has a very individual hand. So you actually can see his work in not only the signed works, but also in the ones that are attributed to him. Here, for example, is the birthday celebrations of Tilkat Govardhan Lalji. And you see a progression in the age of Govardhan Lalji, which helps us to then think about how to date these works. And perhaps the most famous of the artists to emerge during the time of Govardhan Lalji was Ghasi Ram Sharma. Ghasi Ram is famous for his sketchbooks that he has left. And he was perhaps one of the most influential of the artists. He himself was greatly influenced by his friend and colleague in the Udaipur court, Master Kundan Lal, who worked for the Maharana Bhopal Singh of Mewar. And they were all fascinated when in 1901, Raja Ravi Varma came to the court of Udaipur and did works like this of Pratap. And this is in fact a work Raja Ravi Varma did of the Tilkayat Govardhan Lalji. So this had a huge influence not only on Ghasi Ram, but on the court artists as well. And so you see Ghasi Ram's version of Ravi Varma's Hans Damayanti. But Ghasi Ram very soon starts to develop his own unique style, and which is quite realistic. And you can see that in both his paintings and his Pichvais. Champalal Hiralal was another very important artist to emerge at this time. Again, Champalal Hiralal is descended from one of these original families that came with Thakurji to Nadwara in 1672. And many of the works of Champalal Hiralal were done for the Goswamis in the Mota Mandir in Bombay. The Mota Mandir was really patronized Champalal, who stayed there for many years. And really some of the most beautiful works of his are still in the collection of the Mota Mandir. And of course, he was working for all the different Goswamis at the same time. He has left beautiful drawing books, which are now in the family of the descendants of Champalal Hiralal. And you can see some of the drawing books as well as slides from the collection. And these manorats that were another thing that Nadwara becomes famous for in this late 19th, early 20th century is what pilgrims would have commissioned. Their faces would be added from photographs, and they would take these works back home. And the studio that became the most renowned for these Manorat paintings is that of Kubiram Gopilal, which still exists. And the artist that none of you have heard of probably, but was the most significant of the artists of the early 20th century from Nathdwara was actually Narayan's son, Narottam Narayan, who is the artist behind the very well-known and well-regarded prints, all these religious prints that we treasure in our puja ghars were actually the work of Narottam Narayan. And for example, Burli Manohar was one of his best-selling prints. He is the son of Narayan, who we saw in that little drawing earlier. And we see the young Narottam, again, imitating the postcards that are coming in from Victorian England. And then he soon finds his own voice, and that is in these religious calendar, what we think of today as calendar art. But these were works that were, printed and circulated, and so many of them still are to be found in different puja ghars today. Amongst the artists today, Champalal's descendant, Parmanand Sharma, is the current Mukherjee of the temple. Reva Shankar, who's a descendant of Ghasi Ram, sadly died soon after my exhibition, but he was renowned for his miniature paintings and generally being one of the most kind and generous of the artists. He lived primarily in Udaipur. And Anandi Lalji, who we've seen earlier painting Pichvais, he is one of the great Pichvai artists of Nadwara. Yoginder is one of the younger artists associated with Nadwara. He is the descendant of Kanhaiya Lalji, who did those amazing murals at Dungarpur. And there are also artists today descended like Yugalji, descended from Sukhdev, who are also doing more contemporary work. So not all of them are creating Pichvais. Yugalji, while he can do Pichvais, he's also professor at the college in Nadwara and College of Art in Nadwara, but he's also doing works like this. And another of the very famous family descendants is Lalit Sharma, who is known for working on oil. Lalitji's son Kapil primarily does design and also digital works, and everything from hotel rooms to digital works like this. In fact, next time you're passing through the airport, the new terminal in Mumbai, look out for Lalit and Kapilji's work together, Mumbai once Bombay at Terminal 2. So at the time of my exhibition, I wanted to actually take a group picture, and so brought all the artists together because I was creating a room in the exhibition on the artists, and I wanted their voices to be present. At that time, it was decided that the artists would create their own little organization, which between December, when we took that picture, and Vasant Panchami that year, we were able to launch a very basic website. And recently during COVID, and there was a major lockdown in Nadwara, essentially all the pilgrims stopped coming. And there was this time when essentially there was no business. The artists lost all commissions and business. So a group of students from SRCC College, their Enactus group, got in touch with me during COVID. And we worked together to revamp the website of the Artists of Nadwara. And you see this being relaunched on the 18th of February in 2021. So over a year ago now, and you can see we were all in the Zoom mode at that time. With the blessings of the Tilkayat's son, Vishal Baba Shri, we were able to relaunch the Artists of Nadwara with the idea that, despite COVID or whether people can come to Nadwara or not, people from all across the world can now access their work. And essentially the thing about Nadwara was that, between Govardhan Lalji's time and now, the artists again disappeared, their names disappeared from the works. And what the artists are trying to do through this organization, the Artists of Nadwara, and this website is, again, when you buy a Pichvai, you should know who it is done by. And the website helps you get to know the artist, get to know their family, get to know their traditions, get to know the individual work of each artist again in the way that they were well known at the time of Govardhan Lalji and his artists, so that each of the hands of, say, a Sukhdev or a Ghasi Ram is so identifiable. And that is the intention behind this website. You can learn a lot more about the Pushtimarg sect as well. Essentially, I hope some of you at least will come and look at the website, and especially please come to Nadwara come and see the work of the artists and help tell others that this tradition that has survived since at least 1672 should at least continue for the rest of this our times, at least. If we can do something to help in this process, I think that would be amazing. So with that, I will close. Thank you.